Hey guys, so here is the demo for today's class, Intro to Watercolors. So we're going to be doing a maple leaf today. So you're going to want a candle, pencil, and your Anna Linky watercolors, and we'll be making a vibrant kind of fall maple leaf. So to start with, let's make the stem at a bit of an angle. And then we're going to do a straight line just going up the page. Try and get this in the center of the page so we have room. We're then going to make two lines going off to the side, so one here and one here, as well as two going off here and here. So we're following like the vein. Now, pick a point on each side that the leaf's going to move into. So let's start here. For each of these points, we're going to be making kind of a dagger type shape. So moving in, moving outwards, meeting at the point, moving back in. Same here. The dots are useful just to make sure you don't go like really far in on one side and not so much on the other. And here we're going to just meet up like this. Just going to move this back a little bit. Going to do the same for this one. And we're moving up, back in, and finally here. Back up again in this arrow shape for meeting back in the middle again. At this point, if kind of the center's gotten misplaced, you can always add that back in. And then what we're going to do next is just carve out kind of those spiky shapes. So just one or two per leaf. The spikes are going to meet at the same point. And you can even carve even more spikes in just to make an even more natural look. So you start with a spike and then just carve even into the spike. So these can really vary from leaf to leaf. They don't all have to look the same. Actually, they'll look better if they're all a little bit different. So we'll carve into this one as well. Okay, and now that we have our leaf, we can just erase our drafting marks. And lightly using pencil, we can start to draft some of these veins coming through the little points. So they kind of move towards the points on the leaf. Okay, now time for the candle. So I'm not going to go over the entire area of the stem. Lightly erase the top off of some of the stem some of these veins. Then we're just going to trace this all the way through with the candle. So I'm going to trace all the long veins through. And just some of the side veins. So I'm going to make this side a little bit lighter. So I'm just going to trace a few of these veins here, but you don't want too many and you don't need to trace the whole thing. The light's only going to hit along these lines. It's not necessarily going to hit along the full line. Okay, and now I'm going to carefully just use clear water to wet down all of the space inside the leaf. And let the water sit a little bit on the surface of the page. So we're using quite a bit of water here to do a wet on wet technique. Okay, so now we'll start mixing up our colors. So colors in nature aren't really as straightforward as just being sort of green or red or blue. Usually there's a little bit of mix of complementary colors in each color. So for instance, your green will have a little bit of red in it, your red will have a little bit of green in it. So I'm going to start with the green, mixing some of it over here, but I'm going to add just a touch of orange to it to make it a little bit more of a natural tone. I'll make another green that I add a little bit of red to. That's going to deepen it up even a bit more. And then using the same brush, I'll just mix together some red. And since we're using the same brush, this is all going to start to kind of mix together. You can start with any color you like. I'm going to start with red, and we're just going to drop the paint into the leaf. Don't worry about covering all of it because it's going to take a little bit of time for the paint to spread out to its maximum. So it's going to take several minutes. So it's fine to leave little spaces in between these dots. And I'm just mixing together the greens, the orange, and the red. And they're going to combine in a really nice way. So I'll start adding in some orange. You can even add in a little bit of the yellow, which looks like orange. It's right next to the actual orange, but I'll put that here. If your paint's not really moving, you can re-wet the page with clear water. And now I'm going to use a finer brush to mix together green and red to make a brown to come down the stem of the leaf. As you move towards the very end of the leaf, you can add a little bit of ultramarine blue to that mixture just to make a much darker point at the base of the stem. And this can also be dropped in kind of around the base here just to add a bit more contrast. Okay, now I'm going to wash my brush, and matching the color closest to the sides of the leaves, I'm going to come over with my fine brush, these borders, just kind of coaxing the paint to create some fine points here. Now at this point, if you have clear spaces near the edges of the leaf, you can just fill those back in. So I've started with red, now I'm going to pick up some of the green red, so green with a little bit of red. Some of the orange. If you're just using the same brush, the colors are going to mix together more or less anyway. So you can just use the same brush to pick up the orange. You don't have to worry about remixing your colors. It's all going to be kind of dulled down. Now using a paper towel or a Q-tip, if you have one, I'm going to lift out some spaces in between the leaves. So just lift out a little bit of the paint just to add some variation. So these are kind of where bumps on the leaf would be, so where it would kind of be bubbling up. I'm just going to cover this quickly. If your paint has dried, you can just wet it down in these areas and lift it out from there. Now the light is coming over this way, so I'm going to start to deepen up using a mix of red and green some of the shadows on this side of each of the veins. So on the right side of the page. You can even add in a tiny bit of ultramarine blue to make a bit more complexity there. Careful your paint isn't too watery or this is just going to move out on all sides. And you can try and just, again, match the general colors that you're coming up against as you move into these different areas. So I'm just going kind of along the sides of these veins with colors matching the predominant color of the part of the leaf. And you can also at this point add in to areas that are dry enough a few more veins. And I'm just, because I want this to look a little bit translucent, going to come along the edges and just deepen up that color by using a mix of the base color and some ultramarine blue. Okay, and now at this point, if you want this sort of effect, you can use a hairdryer. I'm going to make this more of a scene, so I'm just going to use the side of the candle to kind of come along in the background. I'm going to make kind of like a semi-snowy scene. Now I have to be really careful that when I come in with this next layer, I don't touch any wet parts of the leaf. But I'll use a spare sheet of paper to mix up a tone that I think will look nice. So I'm going to use a little bit of the jungle green, dulled down with a tiny touch of red, and some ultramarine to make like a wintry type gray. And then I'm going to wet down with clear water the outside of the page and just drop that mixture in. And you'll see if it touches the wet part of the leaf, that's just going to bleed into the area. So try to leave a border. But I still like the look if it's bleeding out a little bit. going to add a little bit of a darker version of this mixture. So just exactly the same mixture of ultramarine blue, red, and forest green to create like a really dark grayish blue that I can add around the sides, just kind of at random. And our icy fall leaf is complete. So I hope this was helpful and looking forward to seeing you in class. Thanks.